Hey, thanks, Kevin, and thanks, Tracy. Thanks to everybody who's here joining us. We're going to talk about a topic that is something that I'm very passionate about, and is certainly a very, very important topic, and that is leadership development and training. What I'm going to do over the next several minutes is I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why leadership is important. I will then talk about the skills that go into being an effective leader, and then talk about the brain basis of leadership development. In particular, if we want to develop a high-quality leadership development and training program, what parts of the brain do we need to engage, and what kinds of technologies and tools do we need to utilize in order to engage those parts of the brain? So I'm going to start first with the why this is important. I'm a data guy, so I always like to start with data. And I think this piece of data is really a nice piece to tell us why leadership development is important. One poor leader can cost an organization $100,000 a year in basically adverse or negative effects on employees: low productivity, high turnover, employee dissatisfaction. And that's just from one poor leader. So that's very troubling. This is exacerbated by the fact that people are entering leadership roles earlier and earlier in their career. Now, this is sort of a double-edged sword. So the pro is that the reason we're getting more leaders, more employees that entering leadership roles early on is because we're getting a lot more of these cross-functional teams. Yeah, cross-functional teams. So we're sort of breaking down the silos. We've got engineers on the same team with sales and marketing, product development, et cetera. And that's a good thing. That diversity helps us build better tools, but it places a real challenge on leadership. And in fact, an engineer might be a leader on the engineering part of a project, and a sales manager might be the leader on the sales component of that same project. So it really puts a burden on leadership development. It makes it a lot harder, but if we can develop leaders really well, then we're in good shape. So what are some of the skills that are important in leadership? I want to take a quick step back here and state explicitly that as we go through the skills for effective leadership, you're going to see a huge overlap between these skills and the skills associated with what are called soft skills. Personally don't like that term, haven't met too many people who do like that term. I think people skills is actually a better term because it really has to do with how you interact with and work with other people. But we're going to see a huge amount of overlap between the kinds of skills you need to be an effective leader and people skills. So let's dive into it. One of the most important skills of effective leadership is to communicate. Communication is very challenging. We all know this from, we write an email to somebody and we have a particular, position that we're trying to push, and they come back with something like, wow, you're like, wow, that's not what I said at all, right? So effective communication can be very challenging, and good leaders know how to communicate effectively in really any situation and with any medium, whether it's face-to-face or email. Avoiding unconscious bias. We are all a product of our experience. Now, you may have the broadest based experience, of anybody that you know. There's still going to be holes in your experience, and your experiences influence your preferences, influence your behaviors, influence how you interpret situations. These lead to biases. Now, biases are what they are. They exist. We shouldn't feel bad about ourselves for having biases. We know why they're here. But what we want to do as an effective leader is really look inside ourselves and understand what our biases are, understand where they come from in our experience, and make those biases conscious. I want to be aware of those so that I can avoid any kind of a bias influencing the way I lead my team. Active listening. I think this is probably one of the most important leadership skills. A leader is not somebody who's always the one talking. The best leaders are the ones who are the best listeners. And I don't mean listening sort of halfway. I mean active listening. And I think this picture, this is one of my favorite pictures because I think it really not only shows the verbal components of active listening, but the nonverbal components. So we've got two individuals facing each other, making eye contact. One individual, you know, the guy on the left, let's say he's the leader. I mean, he's clearly putting all of his attention, 100% of his attention on what the other gentleman has to say. The other gentleman can tell. He can see that. He can feel it. He's got an open body posture. And again, we've got this eye contact going on. Active listening, really listening to what people say, not judging them, really listening to what they say and showing them, hey, what you're saying matters to me. It's important. That's a critical feature of leadership. Honesty and integrity. Wow. Pretty important concepts for leaders these days. And I think, you know, the Mahatma is a great example of that. A leader has to be honest. Now, that doesn't mean they always say nice things. Sometimes you have to, you know, provide constructive criticism, but you provide it in the appropriate way. You don't, you know, talk down to somebody in front of the peers. If there's an issue, pull somebody aside, you have a one-on-one conversation. And you're honest, but you're respectful. You show integrity. Really, really key. These kinds of characteristics are really important. This is one of my favorite topics. And I think this is a skill that is so incredibly challenging to train, but so critically important in any position that you can think of, certainly in leadership. Empathy. Empathy is the ability to see the world through somebody else's eyes, to feel what that other person feels. If you can experience true empathy, if you can feel it, if you can show it in your behavior, you could be an amazing leader. That's showing other people respect. It's embracing diversity, embracing difference from you, you know, what's not exactly like you. It's showing compassion. These are absolutely critical skills for leadership and really just in society. Teamwork. Circling back to our discussion earlier about cross-functional teams. You have to work effectively in a team. A team that works well together has a strong leader that doesn't dominate, right? Lets everybody do their part. The whole becomes more than the sum of the parts. And that's really key. And that's a for those of you who have worked on teams, I mean, I can think in my own personal experience of situations where I worked in a team and the whole was definitely more than the sum of the parts, and it was incredibly enjoyable. It was not work. And we all have experienced cases where that's not like that. The leader can really determine, can have a huge effect on whether the team is an effective team or an ineffective team. So taking all of this together, I want to argue that leadership is about behavior and it's about emotion. It's about what you do, it's about how you do it, and it's about your intent. So we've got this cute little cartoon, right? You got the little boy, oh, I'm sorry. Not really. Okay. It's one thing to say, I'm sorry. It's another thing to say it when your facial expression shows clearly that you're not sorry. That is, you know, how you're saying it is not believable. Your intent is not there. Okay. So leadership is about how you behave, how you do things, and your intent in doing it. That's critical, and people are really good at picking that up. People can pick up what your intent is. People can tell how you're saying things, how you're doing things, and it's important that you do this appropriately. Okay, so if hopefully I've convinced you that leadership is important, and if developing leaderships is so important to an organization's success, then, next slide, we should be spending a lot of money on leadership training. If this is really important, we should spend a lot of money on it, and we should be really good at it, right? We should be hitting the bullseye with our leadership training. So those two things should be happening. We should be spending a lot of money, and we should be hitting the target. So let's see if that's true. Well, as of a training industry report last year, over $360 billion was spent last year on leadership training and development. That's a lot of money. Check mark, right? Okay, so we're spending a lot of money. That's good. One half of the equation. Only 1 in 4 leaders or leadership training professionals are satisfied with their leadership development solution. So we're spending all this money and we're not doing a very good job. Thumbs down. We're not doing a very good job of this. To add to the irony, we're actually quite good at training hard skills and technical skills. So the hard and technical skills we're doing actually quite well in L&D. We're not doing as well with leadership. Why? Right? That's the big question. Why is this the case? Hard and technical skills are trained in people. Leadership skills are trained in people. They're trained in the same brains. So why would it be that we're good at hard and technical skills and we're not good at leadership skills? Well, I'm going to answer that question by going into the neuroscience of learning. What I want to do now is I want to talk to you a little bit about the neuroscience of learning. I'm going to talk a little bit about some brain regions, talk a little bit about how they work. I'm not going to go into a really super deep dive. I'm not here to try to impress you with my knowledge of neural connections and neurochemistry. I'm here to try to give you a feel for how this works and see if we can figure out how to build better leadership training solutions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about 3 distinct learning systems. I call these the what system, the feel system, and the how system. Let's talk about the what system. So the what system is the cognitive system. This is the system that processes information and processes knowledge. The critical brain regions are twofold. One is the prefrontal cortex. This is right behind your forehead. The other is the medial temporal lobes, which is on the side of your head. If you ask just the average person on the street what learning is all about, essentially this is what they think learning is about. It's about the what. It's about information. So hit the slide thing again. So let's say that you're learning about compassion. And in particular, you're learning the definition of compassion. You're going to learn the definition of compassion with the what system. That way you will know what compassion is and what it entails. Here's where things start to get interesting. The second system is what I call the feel system. This is the emotional system. Remember, I said that leadership is about behavior and emotion. So here's emotion right here. This is the system that obtains situational awareness. It helps you get the feel for situations so that you can, in fact, almost tell what's going to happen next, and you always generate the right behaviors in any situation. What this system does is it learns how to feel compassion, literally the emotional component, physiological components of feeling compassion. That's what this system learns. That's very different from knowing the definition. This is the feel. Notice that I have this green arrows here. What the green arrows denote, so I have a green arrow from this emotional system to the what system and to the how system that I'm going to talk about in a second. That is to denote that this emotional system is directly connected with the cognitive system and the behavioral system, and it can up and down regulate these. And that's going to become important in a second. Okay, the how system. This is the behavioral system. I have a one-liner that I use a lot. It's one thing to know what to do. It's another thing to know how to do it. And they are very distinct because the what system is the prefrontal cortex and the how system is what's called the striatum, which is a subcortical structure. These are very, very different. So learning how is very different from learning what. Next slide. So what this system does is this system teaches you how to show compassion. Okay, so we've got what is compassion? What's the definition? Feeling compassion, literally the physiological effects of feeling compassion for somebody, and then showing that compassion. I'm going to spoiler alert you right now. I'm going to tell you the punchline, and then I'm going to work you to the punchline. I'm going to answer that question of why that we asked a little bit earlier. So why are we good at hard and technical skills, not at leadership skills? The why is that hard skills are really about the what. They're about information. They're about knowledge. And we've actually done a really good job in learning and development at building solutions that effectively engage the what system. And I'm going to talk about what those are, solutions are in a little bit. But we've done a really good job of that. But leadership's about all three systems. So this is why we can be good at hard skills training and perhaps not good at leadership skills training, especially if we're using essentially a hard skills training solution to try to train leadership skills. It's not going to work. It's not going to work because leadership skills require that you engage all of these systems. All right, what I want to do now is talk a little bit about each of these three systems, talk about their operating characteristics, and then what kind of a learning solution would be ideal for engaging that system. So this what system, again, the real goal of this system is to transfer knowledge from short-term memory, that's the prefrontal cortex right behind your forehead, to transfer information from short-term memory into long-term memory, and that happens through what's called consolidation. Cognitive skill learning involves focus. You've got to study the material. You need no distractions around you. You need to really focus and pay attention to the material in front of you. It involves working memory. You have to mentally rehearse information. I can't just read a definition once and have it stored in long-term memory. I need to read that definition a few times and think about it. Working memory and attention, these critical cognitive processes, are limited resources. So what this means is that I can have a ton of information coming in, that would be represented by these green arrows, but only some of that information is going to get through, represented by the red arrow, and only that information that gets through is going to be stored. So we always have to worry when we're training the what, when we're trying to train information and knowledge, we always have to worry about not overloading the human cognitive system. That's called cognitive load. Forgetting. The brain, the cognitive system, simply put, is hardwired to forget. Some really famous research done in the late 1800s by a gentleman named Hermann Ebbinghaus. He showed that the brain is hardwired to forget. So let me just really briefly walk you through this graph. On the y-axis is retention, so how much information you retain, and on the x-axis is time since you studied the information. So immediate recall, right after you study the information and you recall it, you're at 100%. But within an hour, you're at about 45%. 2 days later, you're at about 25%. Now, I don't want you to fixate on those particular numbers. Different content, different individuals, those numbers are going to be different, but the shape of the curve never changes. You're always forgetting over time. So we've got to overcome this. We've got to build a learning solution that overcomes forgetting and that operates within the cognitive resources available. We don't want cognitive overload. So how do we do this? How do we build a training solution that reduces forgetting, minimizes forgetting, and stays within the cognitive resource load? What we want to do is we want to do what's called spaced microlearning and periodic testing. So there's a lot there. Let me break this down. Microlearning just means present information, present about 5 minutes of information. So you start with like 5 minutes of training. You pick some concept or two that you want to train, and you build your content to effectively train that content, but only for about 5 minutes, because that's within the working memory and attention load. Then what you want to do is you want to stop. Stop training, let somebody daydream, reflect, or better yet, test them on the material that you just trained them on. This is where the consolidation process occurs. This reflection and testing part is where consolidation occurs. This is where you avoid or try to overcome that forgetting curve. Now you'd maybe do 5 more minutes, reflect and test. One more time, 5 minutes, reflect and test. That's the cognitive system, spaced microlearning with knowledge checks or periodic testing. That's the best way to engage that system. What about this emotional learning system? Clearly, it's a very, very important system for leadership training and then by extension, people skills. It's something that we don't seem to do a very good job with many learning and development solutions. So let's talk a little bit about this. Critical structure here is the amygdala and other limbic system structures. These are brain regions that process emotions and give you those feelings, those emotional feelings. The goal of this system really is to develop what I call situational awareness. It's this uncanny ability, it's almost an intuition on, I'm in a current situation, here's how I need to react. I can tell this situation is going bad, it's going to go in this direction, or it's going to go good in this other direction. And so I'm going to be tweaking my behavior and what I do, in the next minute. You can almost predict the future. I mean, it's truly remarkable. How do we train and engage this emotional learning system? One of the best ways to do this is with role play. I call this walking a mile in my shoes, right? When you do role play, you basically pretend that you're somebody else. And you can try out multiple different scenarios. Let's take compassion. You know, you could be in a role play scenario where you show compassion, and then another scenario where somebody's not showing you compassion. This is a really excellent method for engaging this system, the emotional system. But guess what? It costs a lot of money, it takes a lot of time, and it's not scalable. So we're really stuck with a great training tool, but one that we really can't use. So what can we use, in particular with computer-based training? This is where, I like to say, this is where art meets science. The critical approach is what's called scenario-based or situational storytelling. Now, you've probably heard a lot about storytelling over the last few years. Storytelling is really taking off in L&D, which is great. Storytelling, it's really about taking the content that you're trying to train. Let's say I'm trying to train about compassion. Instead of just throwing definitions at people and checking the box, you build a story where there's multiple players, some giving compassion, some not giving compassion, some receiving compassion, some not receiving compassion. You have emotionally charged scenarios, but where you're trying to train this underlying important construct. What happens with good storytelling is that it engages these emotion centers. It draws that learner in. The learner starts to feel, you know, like when you watch a great movie, you know, you feel like you are part of that situation. You're drawn in. You see yourself as part of the story, and ideally from multiple different perspectives. This is scalable. Okay, good storytelling is scalable. Super, that's excellent. And remember the green arrows I had before. This storytelling can prime the learner for behavior change. You're not necessarily changing behavior directly with storytelling, but you're priming that learner for behavior change so that they can take the knowledge that they've gained and these feelings, these emotions, this situational awareness, and start applying it out in the real world. Okay, the behavioral skills system. This is one that I studied for about 15 years when I had my own lab. I really love how the system works. I can't go into a lot of detail though. The key to behavioral skills learning is that you need interactivity. You need to generate a behavior and you need to get real-time feedback. I have this picture of the carrot and the stick. When you do something right, you get the carrot, that's the reward. When you do something wrong, you get the stick, that's the punishment. This is all about physical repetition. I want to take a quick sidestep here. I want to, so let's pump the brakes on leadership for just 1 second. And what I want to do is talk about immersive technologies. Immersive technologies like virtual reality and augmented reality, for that matter, are excellent tools for directly training behavior. The applications in corporate learning, manufacturing, healthcare are absolutely off the charts. This is something that I've been spending a lot of my own time studying. One of the things that actually drew me to TalentQuest initially, I think 3 or 4 years ago, was that I loved the breadth of solutions at TalentQuest. So not only leadership, which we're going to continue to talk about, but TalentQuest actually has a full VR suite of offerings. So, you know, if you have another solution where you really need behavior change, take a look. Really important and really critical, amazing technology that continues to increase in its use out there in the training world. Next slide, you had it up there. So this is not scalable, okay? And there really is no way to scale direct behavioral training with the computer. You really need things like the immersive technologies. Okay, so leadership development requires that you engage all 3 of these systems. So how do you do that? This is a mouthful, so let me break this up. So microlearning, right? Spaced microlearning, we talked about that earlier. That engages the what system, the cognitive system. It overcomes cognitive load limitations. It overcomes forgetting. And I've inserted in here scenario-based or storytelling. So spaced, scenario-based microlearning. That's scenario-based, that storytelling engages this feel system. And when done right, it really engages that system. And then that primes for behavior change. And that's really the goal. Here's what I want to do now. That's the neurobiological basis. Now let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the TalentQuest Leadership Series and talk through how well this engages these systems. There's a lot of talk in L&D about developing T-shaped employees. The horizontal part of the T is a breadth of understanding. The vertical part of the T is the depth of understanding. And what you want to do is you want to develop employees that have the breadth and the depth. One of the things that I like the most about the TalentQuest Leadership Series is that I think it builds, simply put, it builds these T-shaped employees. There are over 70 courses in this leadership series, curated into 30 learning tracks, and those numbers are probably incorrect as of today, or certainly will be by next month, because new courses are being added constantly. And the courses offer both that breadth and the depth, which is really critical. I want to talk about a few of the learning tracks and highlight how they address, some of the issues that we've talked about. So let's take the situational learning track. I talked about situational awareness as critical to leadership, and that involves engagement of the emotional learning centers. Well, there's a whole learning track on that with multiple of courses. Broad-based courses like roles of leadership, all the way down to the skills of the situational leader. Okay, so you're getting that breadth and you're getting that depth. Effective communication. I talked about communication. Same kind of deal. You've got the breadth and you've got the specific, you've got the depth. And finally, leading teams. This is actually one that I certainly resonate with personally a lot myself. Goes into topics like intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, which are really, really, really important topics. To a really cool course on leading generationally diverse teams. Look, it's going to be, a leader who has baby boomers and millennials in it is going to have a different challenge than a leader who has just millennials or just baby boomers. And it's important to know, as a good leader, how to be effective in any of those situations. You've got courses on all of that. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to go through how the TQ Leadership Series addresses and engages these particular learning centers. So training to what? Training for retention, right? We need to overcome the cognitive load issues, and we need to make sure that forgetting doesn't occur. So every single one of the courses in the TQ Leadership Series has a very similar structure. Starts with a context-setting introduction, like by the end of this course, you'll know A, B, and C. And at the end of the course, there's a recap. So you've got sort of the meat of the course sandwiched between the context-setting intro and the recap, which is a great way to facilitate training for retention. You then take the deep dive into the topic. Everything's micro-learning based, 5 minutes-ish for the content. Everything's animation or video with a facilitator. So you've got storytelling, which I'll elaborate in a second. And then critically, extensive knowledge checks. So not only testing throughout, but testing at the end. So you're hitting on all cylinders, essentially. You've got the spaced micro-learning and the knowledge checks, everything that you need to engage the system. Training the feel, right? Situational awareness. All of the content, again, spaced micro-learning, knowledge checks, but all the content is scenario-based and storytelling-based. You've got animation or video with facilitator. Exactly what you need to engage that feel system. This is how you draw that learner in so that they can see themselves from multiple perspectives. That's key. And in fact, as I mentioned earlier, there are courses and tracks focused specifically on situational awareness. So you're training situational awareness, you're engaging the emotional system with you appropriately, and you've actually got courses on what is involved in situational awareness, so super. Training the how, okay, so what we've got here is with the spaced scenario-based micro-learning, we're priming for behavior change, and what the TalentQuest Leadership Series does is supplement the training with out-of-training exercises and practices. So what you're doing is you're getting an opportunity to put to work that knowledge, that situational awareness, so that you can actually end up with behavior change. So that's excellent, and that's the way to go. I am now going to turn this over briefly to Kevin, who's going to talk about some other tools that leverage behavioral science and neuroscience, in particular TQ Insights.
Thanks, Todd. Appreciate it. And so Todd has talked a lot about what we can do to impact the different portions of the brain and how we learn, how we retain that information. Another interesting impact and piece that combines kind of how we change behavior, how we learn over time, and then also how do we apply that is really some things that we can bring to the table in what we call our TQ Talent Insights. This is pretty powerful when you combine it with the leadership series. Obviously, the leadership series covers a lot of different topics, a lot of different areas. But part of being a good leader is also understanding the individuals that you're going to then be coaching and managing and developing. So it's one thing, as Todd mentioned, of knowing what to do, but also how to do it. But then also, how do we tailor that to the individual that we're going to be working with and around? So the Talent Insights is really comes from our proprietary behavioral assessment. It's a personality and cognitive-based assessment. A lot of our clients use it heavily for candidate selection to determine fit for culture, fit for role. But at the same time, it's equally as powerful post-hire when we think about, again, understanding the individual that you are going to be working with as a leader. So, and if you think about it, think about the situations where you've had good managers, where you've had bad managers. There's a very distinct difference in those, and your experiences with those are quite different as well, I would guess. As you know, if you can imagine the impact for you as a leader or leaders that you've worked around, when they know how to focus their employees on the right roles and the right career paths. How do we know how to coach and motivate somebody on a day-to-day basis? What gets me moving and going is quite different than what gets Todd moving and going. Knowing how do we adapt, how we communicate with those individuals. How do we leverage their strengths? Knowing how do I manage that person, coach that person day in and day out. We're all very different individuals, and the better insight we can have into the specifics of a particular individual, the better off we're going to be in knowing how we can tailor and personalize the experiences that we provide for those individuals and how we apply the specific learning that we've gathered from, for example, the TQ Leadership Series. So how do we do it? It's a series of really insights that are driven from the platform. These, think of this as kind of more, it's in a sense, artificial intelligence. So as you can see, we can produce these types of insights at the individual level. So helping a leader understand the key strengths of an individual and how do I leverage those, as well as providing suggested management approaches, for example. So not only what to look for, but really how to apply it. There's also a team component of this, as I'm sure everybody on the phone has read and heard and discussed with others. Teaming has been, but is an important area, but continues to gain more and more focus within organizations because of the structure of our workforces. So the team dynamics component allows a manager or leader to look at not just the individuals on their team, but the team as a whole. What is the personality of my team, for example? What are there are holes that are there? Not only the insights, but again, the system will provide prescriptive guidance on how to better manage that team. And additionally, there are some actually simulation-based tools built in here as well, where we can simulate impacts to a team. If you were to hire somebody, how do they impact and fit into this team? Or if we were to move people around for promotion and succession planning purposes, we can simulate the impact on the team that individual is leading and the team that they're joining, all while understanding kind of what the gaps are and the needs are to build a stronger team. So very powerful tools, all with the focus, the intention of helping leaders better understand the individuals on their team and their team as a whole to make sure that we can provide more personalized experiences for each employee in the organization. Todd, back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. Yeah, that's fantastic. One thing I learned as a behavioral scientist and a neuroscientist is when you look at the neural basis of things like personality and competencies and all the things that are assessed by TQ Insights, the brain basis actually overlaps significantly with the learning center. So from that perspective, I mean, it's an absolute no-brainer that you want to have both. In fact, what does talent assessment allow you? And Kevin mentioned some of this already, but you can personalize the training and get a macro understanding of yourself, of others, and of the team. So, by combining assessment with brain-based leadership development, I personally see this as a real differentiator. And in fact, I mean, I'll be really honest. I am kind of blown away that talent assessment solutions are the majority of the time, 90% of the time, siloed from learning and development solutions. That makes absolutely no sense from a behavioral science and a neuroscience perspective. And I think it's a real missed opportunity not to combine those. All right, we're bringing us down the home stretch. I want to talk about just some takeaways and what you can do now. So, what can you get out of this? Let's say you're tasked with evaluating your leadership development solution, or you're out looking for a new leadership development solution. I would argue, and I hope I've convinced you, that you want to evaluate solutions from a neuroscience perspective. So in particular, do they train more than just that what system? The what system is good for hard skills, not good for leadership. You've got to more broadly engage the brain. Does that assessment tool more broadly engage the brain? You want to find a solution that incorporates talent assessment with leadership development. Again, I do not understand why these are siloed. It is not an optimal situation for employees and for corporate leaders. It's simply put not a good way to do things. So I would urge you to check out TQ Insights, check out the leadership series. They're both grounded in behavioral science and neuroscience. Thank you, everybody, for your time and attention.